This is my review for not one, but two Eversolo F10 power amplifiers, which when you use them combined with Eversolo's DMP-A10 digital source, streamer, server, DAC and preamplifier, it forms Eversolo's very best HiFi system as of April 2025. And you can see the full stack on the rack there behind me. And I think it's an awesome HiFi system in very many ways. However, it might not be for everybody. But this video really is about monoblock amplifiers. And surely everybody wants monoblock amplifiers in their HiFi system because it is the pinnacle way to amplify HiFi speakers. Or is it? I hope most of you are already familiar with Eversolo's F10 as a stereo power amplifier, which means you only need one of them to amplify the two speakers of a HiFi system. So that means using two of them as monoblocks is very excessive because it's twice the cost, twice the space, and probably more than twice the electricity usage. So why would anybody want to use two of them? And I think that really boils down to one simple goal: much better sound quality. And much better, I think, is the operative two words. And that is how I have judged this review. And I don't think it makes sense for me to go over everything about the F10's design, as I have already created a review video for it where I covered all of that in real detail. And the main pros and cons of the amplifier are all mentioned in that video, and how I feel about the VU meters. So there will be a link for you in the comments section down below. So here, rather than wasting your time going over all of it again, I want to keep this video focused on what using two F10 in bridged mono is like, how that compares to using just one in stereo, and what the main difference in overall sound quality might be, with a few extra things that I think would be useful for you to know. And I appreciate how easy Eversolo have made it to use the F10 in bridged mono mode. You literally flip a switch on the back and that is it. You do have to cable up to the amplifier differently, but this is very well labelled, so it's easy to know what to do. And I also think it won't hurt to have another look at the same video clips of the F10's internals, just to remind ourselves that we now get all of these capacitors, that whopping transformer as part of the 1000 watt power supply, the 20 MOSFETs, and everything else here for amplifying each speaker. And that is pretty cool and pretty exciting when you stop and think about it. And not forgetting, we now have much better separation and isolation between the left and right channels. And we also have a dedicated mains feed from the wall and all of the mains filtering for each individual amplifier or each individual speaker channel. And I can't say specifically how much difference any of that makes, but it certainly can't hurt for better sound quality. But what I wanted to know was, does the F10 change in any way? Does its Class A to Class AB bias point change or anything like that when we use it in bridged mono mode? And I asked Eversolo and they told me no, nothing like that really changes. But there is something that does change when we use an amplifier in bridged mode, and we need to speak about that. Because one of the big benefits of using the F10 in bridged mono mode is the change to the power delivery. With one F10 in stereo, it can deliver per channel 200 watts into 8 ohms, 320 watts into 4 ohms, and 450 watts into 2 ohms. So that is already a lot of power on paper. Well, it seems so until you look at the bridged mono power capability, because used like that, we get 650 watts per channel into 8 ohms and 950 watts into 4 ohms, which sounds like crazy numbers, doesn't it? In fact, it almost seems too good to be true that we can have an almost kilowatt monoblock amplifier in this fairly small, not crazy heavy, nicely styled chassis for the crazy reasonable £2,199 price tag. That is insane, really. However, there is something very important here for you to know where that is not quite true. Now, please bear with me here because I am not an engineer. I'll do my best to explain this. My understanding is when we use a power amplifier that is bridged, the reason we get this extra power comes from several reasons, but one of the reasons is because the two amplifier channels working together, the impedance to them gets halved. So an 8-ohm speaker becomes 4 ohms to each of the amplifier channels. And the same would be true for a 4-ohm speaker. Each amplifier channel sees it as 2 ohms, which is where, again, the extra power comes from. And I think why there is an 8-ohm and a 4-ohm power rating for the F10 in bridged mono and not 2 ohms, because at 2 ohms for a speaker, each amplifier channel is working down to 1 ohms. And I think that is where we don't quite get the same thing or the same speaker maybe flexibility as a dedicated designed monoblock amplifier where it has a power rating and design for 8 ohms, 4 ohms, 2 ohms and sometimes 1 ohm speakers. So I think where this becomes important is I think most people using normal speakers, 8-ohm speakers, 4-ohm speakers, maybe with a little bit of a dip below that, I'm sure most of those will be fine. You likely already know if you're using speakers that have really aggressive impedance dips. And in those situations, maybe bridged amplifiers are not the one for you. Maybe you would still be better off with a dedicated monoblock amplifier. So the reason I'm saying this is because using the F10 bridged, it seems amazing on paper, but it's still not quite the same in every situation as a full-on dedicated monoblock. Also, as the F10 is essentially working harder in bridged mono mode, it runs hotter. And I noticed this a bit with the F10 that sat in the middle layer of the rack, not so much with the top one. They run pretty warm anyway, so good ventilation is important with them, but I think definitely more important if you're going to use them bridged. I think most people considering Eversolo's F10, one or two of them, will likely be looking to use them with maybe an A8, but probably the matching A10. And if you are running an A10 and 2 F10 like I have here, the total cost of that system is around £8,000. And that is a huge amount of money for a HiFi system, which means there is an even huger number of competitors or really just different ways to build a HiFi system with that budget. So why would you build it this Eversolo way? Before we talk about sound quality, I think there are a number of reasons, very good reasons, why you would build a HiFi system around Eversolo's DMP A10, because it's an excellent all-in-one digital source music streamer, DAC and preamp. And I would suggest anybody who wants to know more about my thoughts on the A10 should watch my very comprehensive no hype review. And there is a link to that in the video comment section down below. And while you're down there, you might as well click the thumbs up button too if you are enjoying this video. And I have found that the Eversolo F10 is a great companion to the A10. The system synergy, the balance is really very good. But there are some caveats with that. Because the F10 is a power amplifier that has quite a distinctive sound character. It sounds very full and warm in the bass, rich and sweet in the vocals, and a little darker in the highs. So it's a very pleasing, easy to listen to amplifier, but it's not perfect. The soundstage can feel a little congested and a little thick, mostly in the middle regions of the soundstage. And it sounds quite reserved, even at louder volumes, but especially so at lower volume. But with the right speakers, the A10 F10 is a great pairing to listen to across a wide variety of music because it makes all music sound big, bold, warm, smooth and sweet. And to test the sound quality of two F10, I have been listening to them with two completely, totally different speakers. And I was comparing one F10 versus two F10, but also I did a comparison with a much bigger, much more expensive, much heavier stereo power amplifier in the esoteric SO3. And the SO3 has quite a unique design in that it uses multiple transformers, a ton of capacitors, and it's heavy at around 50 kilograms. So that's 10 kilograms more than both F10s together. With a price tag of around £10,000 when new, it's more expensive than this whole Eversolo system. Do bear that in mind. And the speakers I have been testing with have been the Canton Reference 2, so large speakers with large drivers and a very high power handling. And the Cantons cost around £18,000. So this is a speaker where it makes a lot of obvious sense to use a big HiFi system running monoblock amplifiers. And the Canton are 4 ohm impedance speakers that drop to 3.5 ohms at 36 Hz. So taxing maybe for the F10s in bridged mono mode, but they handled these speakers no problem, even at typical Terry Savage loud volume levels. But I also wanted to test what we might call more real-world speakers. And for me, that meant the Mission 770 that you can see there behind me. And the Missions are relatively typical or standard or a good example of a two-way stand mount speaker that I think is a smaller stand mount speaker. You might see them as larger speakers, but I think at £3,500 rough price, including the stands, with an 8 ohm impedance that drops to 6 according to the spec, I thought they would be a great speaker to test as well, because these are not speakers that you would automatically think to put big power monoblock amplifiers on them. So I thought it was a great test, because can two F10 make the Mission sound much better? And again, much better is that really important word, because I don't think it would be easy to spend £2,200 and get much better similar speakers to the Missions. Really not easy at all. So is buying another F10 the best way to spend that money in order to get much better sound? And I think the first thing to say about using two F10 is there is a lot of the same F10 amplifier characteristics that I mentioned before. They still sound warmer, richer, bolder, and sweet. And they have a very obviously tonally full, pleasing sound. So the main F10 amplifier characteristics do not change between 1 and 2, but it does get better. Because using the F10s as a monoblock amplifier, bridged obviously, they, to me, make more sense sonically because they sound more linear in the music delivery. What do I mean by that? I mean there is a little less of that amplifier character that I mentioned before. And you hear it mostly kind of like in the middle regions of the sound, but they sound more transparent to me, more honest to the music to me used as monoblock amplifiers. So yes, there is still that same character of a warmer, sweeter, kind of bolder, slightly darker sounding amplifier, but less so. You hear that being imparted on the different music that you listen to slightly less. You also might think that having 600 plus watts of power per speaker means you'll barely be turning the volume up, otherwise the speakers will explode. But that's not the case here at all. I was turning the volume up not quite as much as with 2F10 compared to 1, but it was roughly the same. And maybe that seems a little odd because, it does to me as well, but it doesn't really, because what we're not looking to change here is the volume, because you can play music easily loud enough with just one F10. That's not the change we're looking for. I think the change that you look for with monoblock amplifiers is for the way music is presented. And what I notice here with 2F10 is how much more solid and just present everything is from two of them. It's like the solidity of the music, like the way everything forms across the soundstage. It has so much more presence in the room. And you do notice this change straight away, but I noticed it most with the Mission speakers. With two F10 turned up quite loud, the missions sounded massive in this room, with so much solidity to their sound, so much full room presence and fullness to everything, while still being relaxed and easy to listen to. And maybe the sound was a touch too dark for my personal taste, but man, there was so much kind of like fullness and presence to the sound of the missions in this room. I don't remember them sounding like that for me before, and I've had those speakers here for years and I've listened to them across loads of different gear, but this particular setup made them sound so kind of like big and full room presence. I was like, wow, I kind of didn't know they had that in them. And that sound reminded me of one of my all-time favorite power amplifiers, the Griffin Antillean Evo, which is a monster Class A, £70,000, I believe, power amplifier. And yes, this Eversolo system didn't sound the same as the Griffin. Obviously, I can't say that, but it just reminded me of that, the way that amplifier presents music with like a full room, fullness and presence and warmth and pleasing character that just kind of hits the whole room like with this fullness and pleasing character. And like I say, that was very, very impressive to get that from the Mission speakers, because I see them as a smaller speaker. So to get that out of them was very, very interesting. I even had to change the way they were set up in this room to allow that to kind of form at its maximum. And how much of this change in sound was down to that massive amount of extra power, or how much of it was related to the fact that we now have two amplifiers, so two of everything, two power supplies and more, I really can't say. But there was a much bigger difference here than I expected to get from the Mission speakers, and I can say that they definitely sounded much better. But interestingly, I didn't notice this same change in sound when comparing 1 and 2 F10 power amplifiers with the Canton Reference 2 speakers. But that was possibly because they already sounded big and full and was maxing out my small room in this regards. So there was likely not enough physical space to make their big sound any bigger. I was probably already maxed out. The big change I noticed with dual F10s with the Canton speakers was back to what I said about the amplifier sounding more linear in bridged mono mode, because when you have a very big and full sounding speaker in a small room, it's like already like a lot of sound in that space. And with one F10, I found it was kind of just congesting the middle of the sound a little bit too much for my taste. However, with two, that wasn't the case. I could hear through the speakers onto the music much clearer and much better. And I noticed this with the very limited, I will admit, set of classical music that I listened to, where in classical music, I think instrumental spatial cues and how a soundstage is created in front of you is so important to the illusion of listening to musicians and not speakers. We want to listen to, musicians in a space, being able to hear, but really you see it with your eyes. You see and hear through the speakers onto the musicians, and them sounding clearer, more well defined, so less clotted in the middle, more open, more see-through, and allowing that music to sound more 3D in the room was the big change that I heard here. And yes, it was clear to me with classical music, but of course, that same difference was there for all music. And on top of that, everything seemed to tighten up or just become more in focus and sounded more micro detailed. So music didn't sound faster per se, but it was easier to hear the smaller details, the subtle contrasts, because there was better linearity. And it was with the Canton speakers where I did the listening comparison between 2F10 and the big esoteric SO3. And this was a very telling test, as it showed to me how the dual F10 can match up better with the Eversolo A10 for a sound that is more pleasing than even a more expensive power amplifier. Now, don't get me wrong, I could easily hear where the esoteric is the better power amplifier still, for sounding clearer, for sounding more transparent, for presenting highs that sound more extended and more lively, or maybe just less rolled off and obviously warm. And driving the Cantons, the bass was faster, it was tighter, more well controlled, and a little more attacking percussive. But the overall sound balance was also leaner and a little more clinical. So not as warm and as rich and as pleasing, so I didn't find it as overall satisfying. And I do think this is just because the balance or the synergy or the fact that it's a whole system maybe from the same manufacturer where they've done their homework and they've made it work great, where the A10 works really great with the F10. And you could say synergy is where, the pros of one offset the less good parts of the other. So that is synergy. But to me, I just think of it as balance. How does that system balance? And if you want a system that's now very powerful, very dynamic, more linear, really big and full sounding, and if that works with your speakers, well then that's what this Eversolo's full system does exceptionally well. But it's not the fastest or the clearest or the most open or the most spacious. So it's all about how systems balance for you and with your speakers. And in conclusion, it's no surprise to me at all that having two amplifiers in mono sounds better than one in stereo. I think that is obvious, and it reaffirms to me that monoblock amplifiers is still, in inverted commas, holy grail of amplifier sound quality in 2025, all things being equal. So I hope you've enjoyed this review. I hope you found it useful and helpful to you in ways. If you have enjoyed it, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe to see more.